I am a nurse, and I think I'm done working nights.
Before we begin this chilling story, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon and let me know in the comments what you liked about the story.
The ghost in the ward.
I was sitting at the nurse's station, flipping through a cheap magazine and sipping on lukewarm coffee when Clara, the other nurse on duty, nudged my arm. "The little girl's wandering again," she said with a smirk, barely looking up from her phone. I turned to the security monitor, and sure enough, there she was. Lila, a girl no older than 7, was standing in the dimly lit hallway. Her figure appeared distorted, grainy, and pixelated through the camera feed. We admitted Lila earlier that evening, around 8:30 p.m. Her face had been bruised and bloodied from a nasty fall down the stairs of her family's old Victorian home. Dr. Green suspected a possible brain injury, something serious, like a subdural hematoma. So we kept her for overnight observation. "She shouldn't be out of bed," I muttered, leaning in to get a closer look at the monitor. "And where did she get those clothes?" When we admitted Lila, we put her in a standard hospital gown. But now she was dressed in an old-fashioned black dress with white stockings, her hair tied in neat ribbons, the type of clothing that might be worn for a Sunday service or a funeral. Her head twitched and snapped side to side as if she was looking for someone. Waiting. Clara chuckled again, texting rapidly. "Well, you going to get her, or do you want me to do it?" With a huff, I stood up. "I'll get her." My shoes squeaked on the cold tiles as I speed-walked down the corridor. "Lila?" I called, my voice echoing. "Lila, you can't be out here." I rounded the corner, expecting to see her frail figure under the flickering hallway lights. But when I got there, nothing. Empty. My heart pounded. I headed straight to her room, my footsteps suddenly feeling too loud in the silent hospital wing. I poked my head inside. There she was. Lila was fast asleep, lying perfectly still, wrapped in her hospital blanket, her IV still securely attached. I frowned. How? I quietly backed out of the room and made my way back to the station, trying to shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at my insides. Kids do weird things all the time, I reminded myself. But there's no way a child that young could get out, change clothes, and then reattach an IV by herself. Clara didn't even look up from her phone when I returned. "Found her?" she asked absent-mindedly. "Yeah," I said, still unsettled. "She's in her bed, sleeping." I hesitated, then added, "I don't think she ever got up." Clara shot me a sarcastic look. "Ooh, spooky. Maybe she's possessed or haunted by that ghost you were babbling about last week." She cackled and went back to her texting, her laughter fading into the soft hum of the hospital lights. I sank back into my chair, flipping the magazine pages, but the words were blurring together. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling, the cold touch of fear creeping up my spine. The hospital felt different tonight, colder, more oppressive. It was almost 3:40 a.m. when it happened again. The security monitor caught my attention. There she was, standing just outside her door in the same eerie black dress. But this time, Lila looked different. She was frightened. Her small hands trembled, her gaze darting down the hallway. "Look, Clara," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It's her again." Clara barely glanced at the screen. "Oh, it's the little ghost girl," she joked, rolling her eyes. My stomach twisted. "Go check on her if you think this is so funny." Clara's smug grin faded. She groaned dramatically but stood up, dragging her feet as she walked toward Lila's room. I focused on the monitor. The hallway was dimmer now, the lights flickering, one by one, plunging the corridor into shadow. Only a faint glow remained above Lila's door. "Great," I muttered. "Another electrical problem." I sipped the last bit of my coffee, but as I set the cup down, something on the screen caught my eye. A shadow. It was shifting, unnatural. At first, I thought it was Clara, but it wasn't right. It was too tall, its form stretching from the ceiling to the floor. Too thin, too wrong. The darkness pulsed and twisted, slowly taking form as it bled into the dim light of the hall. Lila saw it too. She backed up, retreating toward her room, her eyes wide with terror, her small hands clutching at the doorway. The shadow advanced. "Clara!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. My attention snapped to the vital signs monitor. Lila's heart rate was plummeting. I bolted down the hallway just as Clara reached the door, confusion written all over her face. Half of the corridor was swallowed in darkness, just as I had seen on the monitor. "There's nothing out here," she said, looking over her shoulder. Ignoring her, I pushed past her and burst into the room. Lila was lying motionless on the bed, her lips turning blue. "Call Dr. Green," I yelled, my hands already pressing down on her chest. Her heart stopped. I performed CPR, counting each compression as dread tightened in my chest. "Please," I thought, "don't let her die. Please." Then, out of nowhere, the heart monitor blipped back to life. Blip, blip, blip. Her heart was beating again. Clara stared wide-eyed as Dr. Green rushed in, taking over. I collapsed against the wall, tears streaming down my face. Lila recovered quickly. Within a few days, she was laughing and playing again like nothing had happened. As I checked her vitals to release her, I had almost forgotten the shadow, the terror in her eyes. "How are you feeling today, Lila?" I asked, smiling warmly as I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her small arm. "I'm great," she chirped. She turned to her parents with a proud grin. "She saved me." I smiled, feeling a surge of warmth in my chest. "Oh, it was nothing really." Lila shook her head. "Not you," she said, her voice turning cold. "Maggie." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. "Who's Maggie?" Her mother's face paled. She looked down at the floor, avoiding my eyes, while her father cleared his throat awkwardly. "We're all done here," I said, removing the cuff and plastering on a fake smile. "You're free to go." As her parents gathered their things, Lila's father lingered behind. He looked at me with heavy eyes, his voice strained. "I owe you an explanation," he began quietly. "When my wife was pregnant with Lila, she was carrying twins." My breath caught in my throat. "One of them didn't make it," he continued, choking back a sob. "We lost her in the womb. We named her Maggie, and, well, Lila's always believed Maggie is still with her." He glanced nervously down the hallway, then gave me a quick nod before following his family. My blood ran cold. I had seen the other little girl that night, standing in the hallway, watching over Lila. I wasn't the one who had saved her. Maggie had.
Night shift in the empty ward.
There are moments in life when reality seems to bend, when the line between the tangible world and the paranormal blurs. For Amanda, a seasoned pediatric nurse at St. Evelyn's Children's Hospital, one such moment would forever change her. She'd told this story a few times to friends and family, but they always shrugged it off, suggesting she was exhausted, dreaming, or simply confused by the late hour. Yet, Amanda knew, deep down in her core, that what she experienced that night was real. St. Evelyn's was a relatively small hospital, nestled in a quiet neighborhood in a Southern Californian city. The pediatric unit where Amanda worked only had 6 beds, 4 of which were reserved for minor surgeries. Despite its small size, Amanda loved her job. Helping children recover was not just a career, it was a calling. The sight of a once ill child smiling again brought her an indescribable sense of joy. However, during the holidays, the ward was eerily quiet. It was during one of these slow, haunting holiday shifts that Amanda encountered something she'd never forget. That night, Amanda checked in for her 12-hour shift. the ward was completely empty. Not a single bed was filled. On quiet nights like this, staff were usually given the option to take time off. However, Amanda, alongside Karen, the charge nurse that night, had chosen to stay. Karen, a no-nonsense nurse in her early 40s, had dimmed the lights and settled in beside Amanda. They braced for a quiet night. Around 1 a.m., the silence of the ward was interrupted by a phone call from the emergency room. A child needed an IV, but they were having trouble starting it. Karen, eager to practice her skills, volunteered to head down to assist. Amanda watched as Karen gathered her supplies and left, leaving her completely alone in the darkened ward. The familiar beeping of the hospital equipment and the hum of fluorescent lights created an almost eerie ambience. Sitting at her desk, Amanda couldn't shake the chills that crept up her spine. The hospital felt wrong tonight. Too quiet, too still. Brushing aside her anxiety, she returned to her paperwork. Yet, just 30 minutes after Karen's departure, the automatic doors at the front of the unit hissed open. She glanced toward the hallway, but from where she sat, the door was around a corner, out of view. After waiting a few moments and hearing no footsteps, Amanda's curiosity got the best of her. She stood, walking toward the hallway, expecting to find Karen, or perhaps one of the hospital's cleaning staff. The automatic doors, which required a hand to be waved in front of a sensor to open, swung shut just as she rounded the corner. But no one was there. Confused, Amanda waved her hand in front of the sensor and the doors obediently opened. Still, no one. Maybe it was a glitch, she thought, as she returned to her desk. But just as she sat down, the doors opened again, this time accompanied by the unmistakable sound of wheels rolling over the tiled floor, like a gurney being pushed down the hallway. Amanda's heart raced. Normally, the staff would call ahead to let her know if a patient was coming up. Why hadn't she been informed? Before she could react, a nurse, whom Amanda didn't recognize, came rushing around the corner. "We have a 10-year-old boy here. He's bleeding out fast. What bed are we using?" Her voice was frantic, sending a wave of adrenaline through Amanda's system. "Take him to room 6, Amanda stammered, trying to catch up with the sudden turn of events. The gurney appeared around the corner, pushed by 2 other nurses and a pale boy lying motionless on top. Blood soaked the sheets beneath him, seeping from what looked like a massive abdominal wound. His face was ghostly pale, his eyes closed, his breaths shallow. But something was off. The nurses, there were 3 of them, all dressed in outdated uniforms, white skirts that stopped just below the knee, stiff caps perched perfectly on their heads. Amanda blinked. The uniforms were out of place, like they belonged in a different era. And the nurses themselves, they all had the same curly hair and bright red lipstick, their movements mechanical, almost synchronized. The doctor who appeared beside them was no different, his lab coat crisp, his demeanor professional, yet something about him felt wrong. "Mary, hold pressure on the wound," the doctor commanded, his voice eerily calm given the situation. "Jude, prepare for sutures." The nurse called Mary moved with swift efficiency, placing her gloved hands over the wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. But the blood kept coming, spilling over her hands, staining the sheets and the boy's clothes. Amanda stood frozen, the scene before her playing out like a macabre dream. Why did these people look so strange? And why, despite the boy's horrific injury, was no one reacting with the urgency the situation demanded? "Doctor, should I prepare the defibrillator?" Amanda's voice was shaky. The boy's pulse was weak and his skin was rapidly losing color. The doctor ignored her. Amanda repeated herself, louder this time. Still, no response. Panic bubbled in her chest as she turned to help gather supplies. She raced to the supply room, but when she returned, the nurse she had seen earlier, Jude, was nowhere to be found. The room was empty. The only sounds were the beeping machines and the quiet wheeze of the boy's breathing. As Amanda set the supplies down beside the bed, She glanced at the boy once more, really looking at him for the first time. His clothes were strange, like something from decades ago. And then, Amanda noticed something that made her blood run cold. The left side of his head was gone. Half of his skull had been obliterated like it had been blown away by something violent. "He's dead," Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Why are you still trying to save him?" The doctor looked up at her for the first time. His eyes were dark, shadowed as if something far more sinister than exhaustion hid beneath his calm exterior. The nurses stopped what they were doing, turning to face Amanda, their faces expressionless. In unison, they all turned to the doctor. He gave a slight nod, and without a word, they began to file out of the room. "Wait!" Amanda yelled, following them out of the room. "What's going on? Where are you taking him?" She rushed after them, but as she reached the hallway, they were gone. The gurney, the boy, the nurses, the doctor, all of them, gone. The hallway was empty, the doors to the other rooms closed, and the lights dim. Amanda stood there, breathless, staring at the empty corridor. She ran back into room 6, but the bed was empty. There was no blood, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Her hands shook as she backed out of the room, her mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Had she hallucinated it? Was it a dream? But it had felt so real. The boy's blood, the cold detachment of the nurses, the eerie presence of the doctor. Suddenly, the automatic doors at the front of the unit hissed open again. This time it was Karen, returning from the ER, her face illuminated by the glow of the hallway lights. She glanced at Amanda and frowned. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Karen asked, concern lacing her voice. Amanda stared at her, unable to find the words to explain. She just nodded slowly and whispered, "I think I'm done working nights.